I've had one bad job since I've been here. My dad worked for Old Joe Distilling Company. The last 10 years of his life, he worked here.
Mm-hmm.
You know what the problem was?
You were working here too?
Yes. I was his boss.
Oh, really? Hey, it's Kenny here, and this is episode 207 of Bourbon Pursuit. It's been a pretty busy week and a half of bourbon news, so let's get to it. Another warehouse comes crashing down. However, this time it's not because of unknown reasons, but it was because of disastrous weather and wind. OZ Tyler, located in Owensboro, Kentucky, had a corner of Warehouse H get ripped off and barrels started coming to the ground back on Monday, June 17th. About 4,500 barrels of bourbon were in that quadrant that have now been rescued. The warehouse has been successfully deconstructed and the cleanup process is underway. That particular warehouse holds around 19,400 barrels. OZ Tyler has been in daily meetings with the Environmental Protection Agency to make sure that everything stays contained. On the bright side, there has been minimal damage and very little leakage because bourbon barrels are constructed to withstand plenty of movement. J.W. Dant. You've heard the name before because it's one of the many brands owned by Heaven Hill and is also one of the prominent bottled and bond bourbons that you see on the shelf, and it's been talked about previously with Bernie Lovers back on episodes 36, 37, and 89. Well, Heaven Hill may own the name J.W. Dant as the brand, but they don't own the person. J.W. Wally Dant surprised the crowd during the National Bourbon Day celebration in Bardstown, Kentucky, announcing a $12 million investment to build Still Distillery on 2,200 acres of land that he purchased that was once Gethsemane Distillery, until that was actually shut down back in 1961. In 1883, that distillery at this site was called Head and Beam Distillery, but was closed during Prohibition. The distillery reopened the repeal of Prohibition, eventually selling to United Distillers and later Schenley. Production at the old distillery was relocated to Louisville in the early 1960s, and production at this location had ceased. The J.W. Dant brand name was sold to Heaven Hill in the early 1990s. Heaven Hill still produces J.W. Dant bourbon today, so don't expect this name on a future bottle from Still Distillery. You can read more about the history of J.W. Dant and Still Distillery at distillerytrail.com with the link in our show notes. While speaking of Heaven Hill, everyone is up in arms either celebrating or chastising them over the newest announcement of the relaunch of their Heaven Hill Bottled and Bond. You may remember this last year when this product was only available in Kentucky and it disappeared from shelves when it had announced its retirement. However, it's back. But there are some catches. The age statement has been increased 1 year from 6 to 7 years old. It's still bottled and bond at 100 proof. The packaging is a bit more flashy than its white label screw top predecessor. Now, the big news might be that it's not launching in Kentucky. It's not going to be available in Kentucky on the first release. Instead, it will be immediately available in California, Texas, New York, Georgia, Florida, Illinois, South Carolina, and Colorado. And the price has jumped from the once low-budget daily bourbon of $12.99 to nearly 3 times that, with a suggested retail price of $39.99. We're going to be discussing this one in a lot more detail on the next roundtable, so we can see where this new price point positions them in the market, so stay tuned for that one. Today's guest, he needs no introduction. He's easily one of probably the most iconic living figures in bourbon today. He's been on episodes 77, 105, and 175. He's even got his own personalized scooter to get him around the distillery, and that's Jimmy Russell. This podcast touches on his early years and how he was selected to become the next master distiller and how he saw the changes of his own distillery change hands plenty of times throughout the years. It was certainly an honor for myself to sit there and chat with this man one more time to really just hear more about his story. You're listening to this podcast, so we know you enjoy it a little bit. So if you can, please be our boots in the ground. Leave us a review because that helps the show grow and find new people. Now, Let's hear what Joe Beatrice over at Barrel Bourbon has to say, and then we've got Fred Minnick with Above the Char.
Hi, Joe from Barrel Bourbon here. We blend cask-strength, high-quality spirits to explore the effects of different distillation methods, barrels, and aging environments. You can find it on the shelves at your nearest retail store.
I'm Fred Minnick, and this is Above the Char. I was changing my 9-month-old baby's diaper when suddenly an enormous back pain struck my lower back. A spasm seized my spine. It's as if 1,000 vodka troops grabbed their pitchforks and started stabbing me. Thank goodness I was able to place Julian gently down in the changing station as I toppled over in intense pain. I simply couldn't move. And all I could think about was the Total Wine event I had in Atlanta later that day. I had considered canceling it, but decided to push on. I drove to Atlanta from Louisville, stopping every hour to stretch my back. At one point, I thought I was going to pass out in the middle of a Dollar General in Chattanooga as I was shopped for back support things. And if I did pass out there, I don't think I would have woken up with much. It was a very interesting crowd shopping that day. I pressed on. I get to the Total Wine 2 hours late, and there was a decent crowd waiting for me. I tried standing and talking, but could barely stand. So I sat and talked about taxation and bourbon. I never really know what I'm going to talk about at these things. I like to fill the crowd out, and this was one I felt was really hungry for geeky knowledge, and somehow bourbon taxes just kind of rose to the forefront of what to talk about. I went through my spiel, signed some books and magazines, but couldn't have a tasting. For some reason, Georgia doesn't allow people to have tastings in liquor stores. When will our country figure out that responsible alcohol actions are the answer, not pesky bans on things like tastings? I feel really bad for those Total Wine workers because they can't really share the goodness of bourbon. Anyway, the next day, I went to Atlanta's other Total Wine, where I ran into the show's good friend Carrie, a.k.a. Suburbia, who taunted me with a vodka bottle and took a picture. Oh, the pleasure he had. You should check it out on his Twitter handle. Look for Suburbia. It really captured my disdain for the bourbon job-stealing parasite known as vodka. Seriously, vodka sucks. Okay, I told my therapist I would cut back on my vodka rant, so let me get back to the Total Wine stuff. I did a similar talk about taxes at the Kennesaw store, and later hung out with the club Atlanta Bourbon Barons, where the founder, Giuliano, opened up his house and insane collection to me. At this point, after hitting up the urgent care center the day before, I was on some medication for the back and couldn't really partake in much of this great whiskey tasting. But I sipped a little, just a little. One of the members is Atlanta's leading personal trainer and kinesiologist, who sees Atlanta Braves players and people who have a bunch more muscle than me. He offered to look at my back, and that, to me, is the epitome of the bourbon community. We like to help one another. Atlanta was gracious with the bourbon hospitality and concerns for my health, and it just made my trip all the worthwhile. So thank you so much to the Atlanta bourbon community for opening up your arms and accepting me and my bad back as I hobbled to and from all the Total Wine stores and to your homes. I share this with you because I feel like the bourbon community is at a breaking point on the internet. I'm seeing constant trolling and bickering in online forums. And maybe it's time we go back to the old ways of the bourbon social life. You know, when you invited total strangers into your home and poured over your conversations with your very best bourbons. Those were the good old days, and I'd like to see us get back to them. And that's this week's Above the Char. Hey, have you subscribed to my new magazine, Bourbon Plus? You should. The latest cover features the actor Jeffrey Wright, who's starring in James Bond and John Wick. He's on the cover. Check it out. Until next week, cheers.
Welcome back to the episode of Bourbon Pursuit, the official podcast of bourbon, back in Lawrenceburg, recording on site at Wild Turkey Distillery. Wild Turkey Hill, I believe one time is what you called it, right, Jimmy?
It's known as the Wild Turkey Hill. It's been named that by our county. It's known as the Wild Turkey Hill.
There you go. So we have Master Distiller, of course, Bourbon Legend, Jimmy Russell on the podcast today. And before I kind of dig into it, just want to say thanks to everybody from Campari that helped set this up, everybody that also kind of figured out the logistics for it as well. We are recording outside today, so if you hear some trucks going by, it's something that Jimmy had already mentioned earlier to us, that there is a rock quarry probably about 1.5 miles down the road. apparently they make some pretty damn good limestone, and that's where you hear these trucks that are just going back and forth all day.
Right, this is where all the limestone, you have to have good limestone water to make good bourbon, and the Kentucky River is all spring-fed limestone water.
So I guess we'll go ahead and we'll kick it off with that. So everybody already knows Jimmy, so we'll get past that. But we'll talk about water in general, right? Because I think it's one of those things that gets a lot of talk about when it comes to Kentucky bourbon. You talk about limestone, you talk about limestone filtration, but does it really matter at the end of the day? Because a lot of stuff goes through like reverse osmosis, and it's really filtered heavily through there. So what's kind of your thought process?
Well, now in the cooking process, we use just the limestone water. It's not goes through. Only time we use osmosis or anything is when we're cutting the bourbon after it's been aged for years. But it's just regular Kentucky River water when
you're actually cooking it.
Cooking it.
Oh, okay. Mm-hmm. So I guess let's give some people a little bit of a schooling. So when you're cooking bourbon, what's the usual time process when it goes into the masher and everything like that?
Well, it depends on time of year. We're cooking 400 bushels to a mash, corn, rye, and barley malt. Now, the cooking times are the same. We cook corn up to 212 degrees, and then we cook it for a period of time. Then we start cooling down. We add a rye at a certain temperature. It adds a little more starch, a little more flavors. And then we cool on down to certain temperatures. We add the barley malt. Barley malt converts all starches into fermentable sugars. Then we pump it to our fermenter, add our yeast, and the yeast eating on the fermentable sugars produces the bourbon in 72 hours. And this depends on temperature. The cooking temperature is always the same. But cooling down from 212, we're cooling water out of the Kentucky River. You through coils and all. In the wintertime, we can cook and pump a fermented mash, out in a fermenter in 3.5, 4 hours. And when we just shut down in the last part of June, the water was hot. It was taking 4.5, 5 hours. So what you're doing, you're just sitting there and beating that grain to death, cooking it. I use simple terms, just like cooking at home. You leave something on the stove too long, it gets mushy and not as good. So
yeah, but do you get any like say you're putting in like in a baking pan, does it ever actually get like black underneath of it? Like if you actually cooked it too long?
No.
No. So you're not going to you can't actually burn it.
No, you're not going to burn it.
So is there a point when you know that the mash is done, in your opinion?
Oh, yes, you can tell by looking at a fermenter. The first day is pretty smooth and even on top, and the yeast eating on the sugars, that the fermenter is rolling and moving, and it's a natural movement with the yeast eating on the sugars. Mm-hmm. You can see it, and then as it starts finishing off, we call it dying down. It'll start dying down, and it'll come out clear on top.
Oh yeah, that's the fermenters, right? Yeah.
We call it beer at that stage.
Mm-hmm. That's distiller's beer, absolutely.
Right.
So let's give everybody a little bit of a history lesson too, because you started here at Wild Turkey back in
September 10th, 1954.
Okay, so you know the exact date. Do you remember the time?
No.
6 a.m., something like that?
7 o'clock in the morning.
Maybe I'm not the first person to ask that one. I don't know.
Yeah.
So you've pretty much taken, you've done pretty much every single role with inside of the distillery
yes, I have.
As well.
Yes. Most of the times you start in the bourbon business, you start in one place, you stay. The old master distiller took me under his wing, and I started out in the lab in the distillery. Time I learned that, he learned the job well. You can sit back and take it easy. Then they'd move me to something else. So I've had experience in running a bottling operation, running a whole plant, and actually I was plant manager for several years.
Mm-hmm. So what made it? And by the way, who was your master distiller?
Mr. Bill Hughes. He was a young distiller before Prohibition, and he lived right up here at the top of the hill. Mm-hmm. And he took me under his wing and started training me. I was born and raised here in Lawrenceburg, Anderson County, and he had known me, all my life, and he more or less took me under his wing and started training me.
What was it about you that? Did he see something? Was there a glimmer in your eye? Did you ask? Like, what was it?
No, I didn't really know. They just started training me doing everything here.
He's like, here's the biggest sucker in the room.
Probably. Nobody else would have it. No, I'm teasing.
So what were those beginning years like when you're trying to have this apprenticeship?
Well, he's learning everything in the distillery. I worked in quality control and the distillery. That day and time, we didn't have all this fang-dangle equipment you have now. we'd run analysis on the corn, check it, make sure it meets our standards. Everything we done by hand. Now you have good equipment to check all that now. But say you check all the grain, and then maybe before the day was over with, you might be up there with a scoop shovel shoveling it out. Done a little bit of everything.
So you started in 1954, right?
Yes.
And so at what point was that during post-prohibition, and was there anything that was, I guess, prohibition-esque that affected your job at the time, or was everything just running full cylinders?
We started, prohibition ended in 1933. And this distillery, some of the buildings, some of our storage buildings here was built for in the 1890s. And most of the distilleries was dismantled because it went from 1919 to 1933. A lot of them didn't think they'd be back in operation. But the family that owned this at that time was a big rock quarry where they mined the limestone out right here below us. And they owned that rock quarry too, so they'd work here in the wintertime, work in the rock quarry in the summertime.
So you weren't running full cylinders like you are today. Absolutely not.
Still the same way as through the hot months, July, August, middle September. We don't make any bourbon. It's just too hot doing the. Now bottling and warehouse and everything goes on all the time. Before it's the cooking mash, it just takes too long to cook them and cool them down.
Now, do you think that has any effect on the supply of what you all can try to produce? Or, I mean, do you look at it as maybe we should throw in some air conditioning units, open some windows and keep cooking?
That's not the problem. It's the water.
Oh, is it?
Well, see, we start having chilled water to cool it down, and it just takes so long. But we've doubled the capacity on our distillery in the last few years, so we're running about 3/4 the capacity right now. So when we built everything, refurbished everything, we more than doubled our capacity. And the way we got it now, we can put in extra fermenters. We can still put in more fermenters and increase more and more.
I mean, do you see the day coming when you're going to need to do that, or is right now everything pretty good in status quo?
Well, I hope we have to, because when I started, 50 or 60 barrels a day now, because we're strictly our own product. Everything's Wild Turkey products here. We make our own product, age our own product, and bottle our own product.
Well, almost, right? You've got a few other things out there. Old Rippy, Bond and Lily.
Well, that was two old distilleries. That was a one-time deal. They went back and done some. Campari done that. But that's some old distilleries was here in town. They've been looking at some of the old distilleries before Prohibition, maybe doing a special every once in a while on them.
Yeah, I was about to say, I was like, there's another one that could be coming out. I think it was what was it? The Barons. The Barons releases or something like that. It looked like it was kind of another Campari thing, but we figured you probably didn't have a whole lot of your hands involved in that one either.
No, I didn't.
So another thing, I guess let's give an idea of what. So at some point you were also. Do you remember when you had to start going on the road to start talking about the bourbon?
Yes, it was probably at least 30 years ago or more. In production, the master distillers were working in production. They just, it's the plant. That's all you done. And our company started me out going on the road, and I made a trip all across the United States. And it was completely different than it is now. Everybody, it's all whiskey. It don't make any difference what it is. Nowadays, everybody, with all the internets and everything, everybody knows everything's going, just like this broadcast, y'all covering everything. People knows what's going on all the time now.
Well, there's a hungry consumer out there, right? They want to know more.
That's what I say. When I started, it was all whiskey. It didn't make any difference what it was. But now they're very well educated. They know what's going on all the time.
So what were some of the biggest challenges when you were doing that in regards of trying to get people to either listen to you or try the product?
Well, they listened. When you started talking to them, they really listened. And that's when these bourbon societies come along, whiskeys of the world. And it's all over the world now. Anywhere you go in the world, for many years, bourbon was strictly a Southern gentleman's drink. They got their cards or cigars, and bourbon went to the back room, played cards. That's where it comes in. I don't know whether you ever heard the whole story. You never drank bourbon until after 5 o'clock. Well, somewhere it's always 5 o'clock.
Yeah, there you go.
But that was the old story, and then it's come a worldwide drink now. The export market is huge. everywhere in the world now, bourbon is really doing well.
Were you, because you were, I guess you consider yourself a pioneer when it comes to going out traveling and talking about the whiskey. Were you nervous?
No, not really.
No?
I'm just plain old Jimmy. I'm the same.
Well, I mean, at this point, yeah, you've stood up and you've talked in front of a bunch of people for quite a long time. And I know one of the things that was always relatively funny was Eddie would always say, you know, you didn't really do a whole lot of talking at home, but you should see you at the distillery. You're doing your thing. Then you're always talking.
Well, that's what he said the first trip he made with me. He come back home and said, "Mama, you don't know Daddy." Said he don't say nothing around here. Said you can't keep him quiet when he's out on the road.
Do you think you found like a new happiness when you were traveling of trying to find a way to connect with consumers?
Well, Dad, but I've always been people. I enjoy people. I call myself a people's person. I like to be just like here. I try to get down to the visitor center at least once today. Talk to the visitors, see what they have to say about it. And my wife likes to come here too. And on Saturdays, my family has breakfast together. We're a family.
Mm-hmm.
Everything's open to y'all except our home. That's off limits. But we have breakfast together every Saturday morning. And she'll come out with me. Actually, she worked here before I did.
Mm-hmm.
She worked here for 8 years, so our children come along. And she stayed home, took care of the children. And we have breakfast. She likes to come out here and see the visitors, and talk, and they like to see her. And so and then after church on Sunday, we normally come out a little while on Sunday afternoons. I get to spend more time in the visitor center that way. Through the week, I got a job to do up there, and I don't get down here as much.
So, you know, I think I remember this correctly when you said your wife, Joretta, by the way.
Yes.
Now, was this place called, was it Old Tub or Old Joe? Is that what it was?
No, it was Anderson County Distilling Company.
Anderson County? Okay.
And then one time it was Rippey Brothers. And then it was JTS Brown at one time.
Mm-hmm.
And then since 1971, it's been Austin Nichols.
Gotcha. All right. Well, see, I'm learning something today as well.
Yeah, Austin Nichols Company, they had their bourbon made here. And it was shipped to New York and bottled in New York at that time.
Mm-hmm.
And they bought everything out here, bought the whiskey that they owned already here. I mean, it was already theirs, and they bought it, and they didn't buy any of the other products at JTS Brown, any of them. They didn't buy any of that.
Right. So at what point, so you were here during the entire Austin Nichols?
Since they've actually owned the bottom everything here in Kentucky.
Absolutely. So what was it like during that time to sit there and distill and then just ship everything away? Like what was the...
Well, we were still bottling everything here.
Okay, you're still doing that too.
Yeah, we was doing everything here.
Mm-hmm. So talk about it a little bit, because that was in the 70s, right? So it wasn't the heyday for bourbon.
No, bourbon was say back in that day and time, bourbon was strictly a Southern gentleman's drink.
So what was the, I guess you could say the aura or the feeling that, you know, kind of went through a lot of the veins of people around here of what's going to happen with bourbon during that time? I mean,
well, you know, before Prohibition, it was 12 distilleries here in Lawrenceburg, Anderson County. We was known as one of the biggest distilling places it was at that time. Most of them, when I started, was still 4 here. Four Roses was known as National Distillery here in town. Old Joe Distilling Company was here, and Hoffman Distillery was here. Mm-hmm. And then we were here. So when I started, there were still 4. And now we're down to 2, Four Roses and us.
Right. And so what was the Old Joe and Hoffman? What kind of fate were they delivered?
Well, Old Joe was one of the oldest brands. It started in 1818. It's one of the oldest brands, and they had several different brands. And then Hoffman, they had the Hoffman brother, and then they started Esrabrook. Mm-hmm. There's where it started.
Which, from what I understand, is Ezra Brooks wasn't even a real person, right?
I thought he was. I'm not sure.
Yeah, see, I
don't know.
I think that's been one of those biggest, the lores of bourbon. Nobody actually knows who Ezra Brooks actually is. I think it's just a fictional character.
It could be, but I know they
put it this way: if Jimmy Russell doesn't know, I'm gonna go ahead and put my stake in the ground. It might be fictional. I might be right on that one.
You might be right on that one.
So I kind of want to go back a little bit about your time on the road and what it was to start doing that, because you said you weren't nervous, but what was the reception of a lot of those people? You had said that they were listening, but do you think that sort of helped kickstart the market at the time for what we're seeing today?
Oh yes, they started wanting to learn about it then. And back to Ezra Brooks, one of the fellows that owned the distillery. His first name was Ezra. Now, well, that had anything to do with it, I don't know.
Well, I don't know either.
But the fellow that owned the old Hoffman distillery, one of the owners' first name was Ezra.
We'll have to look into that. We'll put that on the research papers for later. But again, I kind of go back to your traveling, the reception of those individuals and how that kind of kickstarted. So how long and how many years were you traveling? And I know you're still doing it a little bit, not near as much.
Well, I'm still doing it in the States. I'm not going overseas. Eddie's doing most of the traveling overseas now, but I've been in just about every country in the world with talking about bourbon. And say it's become a worldwide drink. People's really educated anywhere you go in the world now. And they say you have the bourbon societies in Japan, Australia, Europe, everywhere. Women of the bourbon, women of the whiskey of the world, and everything nowadays.
Absolutely. So do you, I guess I'm trying to find a good word to kind of summarize this with, but when you're, did you look at that time traveling as a good time to be able to do that, or would you have rather have been back here at the distillery kind of overseeing a lot of the operations?
I enjoy doing that. I would want to be at the distillery. I wouldn't want to do it all the time like a lot of the ambassadors is now. They're on the road all the time.
Mm-hmm.
But ever so often be out on the road and see what the people has to say. You make it, age it, and bottle it, and ship it out, unless you had complaints, and we've had very few of them over the years. You never heard any more about it. This way, when you're out in the field, you get to meet people that's enjoying it and drinking it and hear what they have to say about it.
So when we talk about just the whiskey in general, what do you look at as some of the more brands that you've fallen in love with? We've talked to Eddie and you talk about everybody's got their baby.
Right.
Everybody's got their baby. And so he looks as Kentucky Spirit and Rare Breed were really your babies.
Yes. Kentucky Spirit and Blanton's was the first two single barrels on the market way back in the early 90s. The first two barrel proofs on the market was Booker's and Rare Breed, and that was late 80s, early 90s. Now everybody has them, but they were the first two on the market.
So kind of talk about what the Kentucky Spirit line really is and what it kind of means to you as well.
Well, the Kentucky Spirit is a single barrel.
Mm-hmm.
You're hand selecting and selecting one. When you say single barrel, it has to come from one barrel and one barrel only. So you're selected. Now here, the way we do it, every barrel has a little different taste, even though it's the same going in it. The way a white oak tree grows in the woods has effect on the tree. I use simple terms. You plant flowers around your home all the way around. Some will do better on one side than on the other because they get more sun, more rain, or same way with white oak trees. So when we're selecting consistent taste. Now, we have this barrel program where bars, restaurants, distributors can come in and select their own barrel. We'll have some more spicy, it depends on the wood, some less, because they know their customer. We're trying to please everybody where they know their customers, and they're picking one. One of them might want it more spicy, one might not want it as spicy, so when we're selecting single barrels.
So, how often were you actually going through and testing some of these Kentucky Spirit barrels to see if they matched a profile that people would want to come in and actually purchase them?
We've always done that. We check everything. We're heavy on control. Our grain is checked before it's ever unloaded. We check it after we ground it. We check it when it's being cooked. We check the fermenters. We taste a new product before it ever goes in the barrel. And then we check new barrels to make sure they meet our standard. We use the number 4 heavy char. Mm-hmm. We make sure everything meets our standards before.
So it's like you almost have like a battle of wills here, right? Because you got this heavy lean on consistency where you're saying like, yes, we've got one mash bill, we go in one entry proof, we do this to have this level of consistency, and it's like, but we're going to come out with a product where every single thing is different.
I like to be consistent, even though I've come up with American honey. I've come up with several different experiments over the years, but I use simple terms. I eat certain foods, and if I don't like the taste of them, I'm not going to eat them again.
Like what? Like what? What foods are you not going to try again?
Well,
because some people say like, I'm too old to eat this anymore. Like, I'm going to enjoy the rest of what I'm going to eat.
Well, if my wife's here, she says I eat too much steak and beef and,
You can't have enough steak. That's
and
fine.
barbecue.
Yeah, there you go. What about stuff that you're not going to touch? Anything that you're not going to touch anymore?
No, really, it's not very few things that I don't like.
All right, so let's talk a little bit about the warehouses here. So it seems like you probably know every nook and cranny of a lot of these things, right? So
Right.
do you have a favorite warehouse?
You know, to me, most of them, if you sit near, you see them. They all sit at about the same level, get the same airflow, and everything. Where some places are, they're down in valleys and different places. But here we're getting, now Eddie likes A and B warehouse. He says it's easy. But, you get something in your mind, you believe it. But me, I don't see a lot of difference in any of our houses.
What about the floors? Do you have a particular floor that you're akin to?
Well, the third, fourth, and fifth floor is ideal aging. The first and second floors, these 7-story warehouses, it can be 30 degrees difference between the top floors and the bottom floors. It ages too fast on the top floors and don't age fast enough on the bottom floors. So at times you have to rotate the bottom. The middle floors is ideal. The humidity and temperature and all that is not that identical, big change in it. So, but the bottom floors and top floors, it is. If you was over there now going through the warehouse, you start up them steps. Every floor, you feel the difference in the heat going up.
So why do you think they stop? Why'd you stop at 7? Like, so why wouldn't you go like a 50-story warehouse? Do you love bourbon? How about festivals? Of course you do. So join Bourbon Pursuit in Frankfort, Kentucky on August 24th for Bourbon on the Banks. It's the Commonwealth's premier bourbon tasting and awards festival. You will get to taste from over 60 different bourbon, spirits, wine, and beer vendors, plus 20 food vendors, all happening with live music. Learn more about bourbon from the master distillers themselves that you've heard on the show, and enjoy food from award-winning chefs. The $65 ticket price covers everything. Don't wait and get yours at bourbononthebanks.org. And through June 30th, you can get your discounted ticket offer, 2 tickets for the low price of $110 when using the code BOB2019 during checkout at bourbononthebanks.org.
Hey everyone, Ryan here, and I know when I celebrate a weekend with friends, I want to bring some of my best bourbon. However, if I'm on the car or a plane, it's not convenient. Plus, my bottles are clanging around, they're not really secure, so I have the perfect solution. The Aged in Ore Travel Decanter allows me to put 2/3 of my prize bottle in its unique tumbler. It's great for camping or really any outdoor activity. With the built-in 2-ounce pour lines, I know I'm giving my friends just the right amount of my special bourbon. Go learn more at pursuittraveldecanter.com to get yours today.
You've probably heard of finishing beer using whiskey barrels, but a Michigan distillery is doing the opposite. They're using beer barrels to finish their whiskey. New Holland Spirits claims to be the first distillery to stout a whiskey. The folks at Rack House Whiskey Club heard that claim and had to visit the banks of Lake Michigan to check it out. It all began when New Holland Brewing launched in '97. Their Dragon's Milk beer is America's #1 selling bourbon barrel-aged stout. In 2005, they applied their expertise from brewing and began distilling. A beer barrel finished whiskey began production in 2012, and Rack House Whiskey Club is featuring it in their next box. The barrels come from Tennessee, get filled with Dragon's Milk beer twice, then mature bourbon is finished in those very same barrels. Rack House Whiskey Club is a Whiskey of the Month club on a mission to uncover the best flavors and stories from craft distillers across the U.S. Along with 2 bottles of hard-to-find whiskey, Rack House's boxes are full of cool merchandise that they ship out every 2 months to members in over 40 states. Go to rackhousewhiskeyclub.com to check it out and try a bottle of Beer Barrel Bourbon and Beer Barrel Rye. Use code PURSUIT for $25 off your first box. So why do you think why'd you stop at 7? Like, so why wouldn't you go like a 50-story warehouse? Like, what would be the ideal way of not doing something like that?
Well, I don't know how that would look, but
It'd be monstrous.
it'd be monstrous. But back in that day and time, they didn't have all this equipment you have now. They had pulleys and horses that pulled the barrels up to the top floors.
Oh, really?
Yes.
Yeah, because I guess, you can go in some of like these warehouses and you do see the you can see like the pulleys, and you do see like essentially like the almost like an elevator shaft. You put it on, and you get
take it up, pull it up, and pulleys and horses. That's what they told me they used to for Prohibition here.
They didn't like put a backpack on you with a rope and make you go pull them up.
Now wait a minute, another thing. And now you have ricking machines and all to put them up in the three-tier ricks.
Mm-hmm.
Back in that day, we called it drop ropes. You had a cable with hooks on the end, and you looped it up over the floor above you. And one fellow would hook the barrel with the hooks, and the other fellow would be back there pulling them up.
Oh, really?
Put them in the rig. Now you have all kinds of equipment to handle that now.
Yeah.
Same way taking them out. You had to take them out the same way.
So what other? I mean, let's go ahead and rewind the clocks of time here, right? So during your time, what other type of innovations have you seen when it comes to just, either that's rolling barrels or ricking barrels or dumping or anything like that that's sort of either made it easier or just...
It's made it easier. You got better equipment now. Everything's better equipment now. You know, in the dump room, you used to knock the bung out of every barrel. It's still, now we got... you got a bung puller, pulls the barrels out, sucks it out there now. Same way in filling barrels, you filled every barrel.
Mm-hmm.
And then you had to drive the bung in it, roll it out. And it's a lot of those things is better equipment now. I say our farming and everything, we haven't changed anything, but you just have so much better equipment now than you did. And everything distilled, you run it by hand. You had one hand on the steam valve, one hand on the flow valve.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the way you control. You got to be consistent in proofs on your still. If your proof runs up and down on the still, the flavors are going to be up and down. So you have to be consistent to get good. If you want consistent taste and flavor, you got to run the same proof all day long.
So I guess now it's a lot easier because it's all probably computer controlled.
Well, now we have computers, but we still have to have the operators on them.
Mm-hmm.
Instead of doing it by hand, they can sit there and
click a mouse, and they can make it like that.
And then they had, when we're grinding grain, they have to be there at the meals. When we're cooking, the cooker fella has to be around the cooker. When we're filling a fermenter, he has to be there.
Mm-hmm.
So we've got computers sitting there and doing it by hand. And that still, at the middle of that still, is about 240 degrees.
Mm-hmm.
And it was hot back in that day and time sitting there.
I can imagine.
Now you got air-conditioned control rooms for them all set in.
Oh, yeah. Now they're living life of kings, right?
Yes.
Yeah. So you got to see the hard days.
The hard days. Everything's done by hand. Yes.
So let's talk a little bit more about the distillation pieces of it. So you've got one mash bill that you do for all the bourbons, but you also have a rye.
I have a rye mash bill.
Right. Mm-hmm. So talk a little bit about the rye. When was that introduced? Because I know for a while, you used to have wild turkey from Maryland source rye.
Well, when I started, it was like bourbon. Even to this day, you have a lot of people tell bourbon can be made a distinctive product of the United States of America. And a lot of people think it has to be made in Kentucky. It's not bourbon. When I started, if rye wasn't made in Maryland or Pennsylvania, it wasn't rye whiskey. Rye was the dominant grain on the East Coast when they come here, and that's what they first started using. Probably George Washington was one of the first distillers. I'll get this question all the time. Who was the first distiller? Some of them says they weren't. You know what I say? The first old farmer got over the mountains and got his still set up. He was the first.
Probably the first one.
But a lot of them claims they were the first and this and that and another. So I don't know whether anybody really knows who the really registered distillery was.
Mm-hmm. No, that's going to be a mystery that we're never going to solve.
Mm-hmm.
So back to the rye, so when was that introduced here? Because we had mentioned that it was sourced at one point for wild turkey.
Well, it was made in Pennsylvania. Maryland made for us in Pennsylvania.
Okay.
But ever since I've been here, we bottle rye.
Mm-hmm.
Then we started making our own rye, probably late 60s, early 70s. Most rye says 95% or 100% rye. Ours is old-fashioned formula. It's got rye, corn, and barley in it.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the way, if you look back at the original recipes for rye in Pennsylvania and Maryland, that's what they were.
Right. So I mean, you're keeping the same mash bill that you sort of were even.
Right.
Do you can consider that contract distilling if you were taking it out of Maryland and bringing it back here? Is that technically what it was?
No, they was making it for us.
Yeah, wasn't that considered contract distilling or?
Yeah, they was same way a lot of distilleries in Kentucky right now does a lot. So it's many brands that does not have a distillery.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a lot of, and that's what's made the bourbon market short right now. A A lot of them, bourbon's made such a huge jump in the last 7 or 8 years. Same way with rye. A lot of them were selling bourbon to other people, and they bought it and labeled it under other brands. And now they're short of bourbon.
So what's your take on that? Do you think are you a fan of NDPs, non-distilling producers? Do you think?
Well, they're making it for people how they want it made, I guess, or ever how they want it done. But no, my theory is, as long as it says bourbon or rye, all of us are going to come out ahead on it.
Right. Rising tide raises all ships, right? That's the way to look at it. So you've been doing that for a while. Rare Breed is the barrel proof baby of yours. Right. So kind of talk about the inception of that.
Well, actually, we were tasting, we sample everything. We're sampling as aging each year sitting here. And a lot of visitors come in, we'd be sampling. We would sample right in the warehouse at that time, knock the bung out and had a thief, pull it out of the barrel and sample it right there. A lot of visitors come in and kept saying, well, why can't we get some of that? Why can't we get some of that? Mm-hmm. And that's what brought to me, that's what brought the idea for us here, that if they was wanting it,
that we could probably make it happen.
Right.
It's easy enough to just you can just basically just dump it right away. You don't need to proof it down too much, right?
Oh, you can't proof it down.
Oh, yeah, not going to proof it down at all.
The only thing you can do is put a little water behind it to clean out your filters. Because you got a filter to get some of that char, heavy char. And the dump troughs, you'll see big flakes of char in there. It comes loose in that barrel. Then you have a lot of little fine char that you have to filter to get that fine char out of it.
A lot of people like that fine char. Yeah. At least some of the whiskey geeks. What about you? Do you when you have the opportunity to just go and sample something or go ahead and just fill up your own bottle, whatever it is, do you get a little bit of that just barrel char sitting around in there? Do you like that?
Really, you don't get, with the thieves pulling it out, you don't get that in there. Mm-hmm. It's when you dump the barrel and get everything out of it.
Right. But are you a fan of it? Because people I mean, I don't know. I look at it and you're like, oh, it's kind of like an extra little thing about having the bottles. You can swirl it around. You can see the char kind of.
Well, a lot of people think so. There's something wrong with it when they see that. That's what it is.
Yeah, I could see probably a general consumer market would probably look at it like that. The same reason why everybody went to chill filtration at one point, because you'd put ice in it and all of a sudden it looks cloudy.
Right.
But now we're starting to see this shift or this turn where people they're asking for non-chill filters.
Non-chill filter.
They're asking for throw a little piece of char in there for good measure, so I know it's authentic or something.
Actually, we never used to chill filter. It depends on the proof. It depends on how much water you're adding when you cut it down, whether it needs chill filtering or not. So at 101 proof, up until just a few years ago, we never chill filtered it at all. Now, what'll happen to it, if it's, say here, shipping it from here and maybe 40 degrees, it goes to Canada, 20 below, it get cloudy and hazy. And that's what you're doing. You're taking out some of those things that it won't get that away when you chill filter it.
Now, there's always the never-ending debate or story. If you do chill filter it, are you removing any flavor?
Well, unless you see by federal law, if you move so much flavor, you can't call it bourbon anymore. Mm-hmm. So no, you're doing very little flavors on it.
So you don't think it's really affecting anything? You think it's more of an aesthetic appearance?
Aesthetic, no.
Yeah.
Let's say now, the lower proofs, if you're adding a lot of water, see, we're not allowed. The rule of thumb, it takes about a gallon of water to produce 100 gallons of bourbon, one proof point. So our barrel proof right now is 116.8, and we're bonded at 101. You're adding very little water to it. Now, if it's coming out of that barrel at 140 something, you're cutting it to 80 proof, you're adding a lot of water to it.
Absolutely. Because
we just still distill at low proof and put it in the barrel at low proof. So, as I say, the higher you distill, we're allowed to distill up to 160 proof. Mm-hmm. And I use simple terms. You like to eat steak?
Do you want it well done or you want a medium rare?
Right.
Yeah.
You like it well done?
I'm not a well done fan. No, I'm a medium rare. Well, just you don't get a lot of those flavors.
You answered my question. You're taking the flavor out of it.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I mean, so if it sounds like you're a steak guy, we were talking about it already.
Right.
So
steak and baked potatoes.
are you a ribeye, fillet? What's your cut of meat?
I like all, but I'm a prime rib person.
You're a prime rib guy. I didn't even think about that.
And raw horseradish with it.
Oh yeah. That's so. Joe Red, is she a prime rib cooker for you? You go out around town
we
and
go out.
Yeah.
When the children were growing up, she cooked all the time, and now just the two of us, and she never knows what time I'm getting home at nights. So we eat out just about that. If I'm in town, we eat out at lunch. Mm-hmm. And it's bad when you go in restaurants now and they bring you tea to you and everything before you sit down. You've been there too much.
Yeah, well, I mean, you're here in Lawrenceburg, so I'm sure everybody probably knows you by name. That's for sure, right?
Well, even in Lexington, every place too. We go to Lexington a lot because they got a lot more restaurants than we have here in Lawrenceburg.
Absolutely. And so let's kind of talk about your time here at the distillery. Now you spend a lot of time down at the gift shop, shaking some hands, signing bottles and stuff like that. I
try to get down at least once today, but I'm in the distillery most all the time. I try to get to the visitor center at least once today. Usually about this time in the afternoon, because they get off. The regular workers gets off at 3:30. So I usually go down there late in the afternoons and sit around.
Is that the best? You think it's the best part of your day, or do you just like to have a healthy balance of getting in front of people?
Well, I want to hear what the people has to say. I want to listen, see what they have to say and everything.
And plus, you've got your scooter, your own personalized scooter down there.
Right, they had to. My knees bad. I can't get around in these fields anymore. He goes in these fields and all. I ride it down here.
Right. Really? Okay, so it's an off-road kind of guy.
Yes. It run 40 miles an hour on the road.
Oh, well, you could just take it through the McDonald's parking lot if you're getting hungry, too.
Right. It's not licensed, but you can license it for the road. It's got turn signals and everything on it. They bought that special for me. I didn't even know they was getting it till one day they said, "We need you down to visitor center." Well, what it was, I thought somebody down there wanted bottles signed. I walked in and they come pushing that out. Said, "Here, this is what you're going to ride around here from now on."
But you actually came up here. We're recording outside on this hill, and you actually came up here in your car. You actually drove up here on that one.
Yes. Now, if it'd been first part of the week, I could. Well, they tease me about this. You know what I drive most of the time?
What do you drive most of the time?
A 1998 Ford pickup truck, four-wheel drive.
Yeah.
Out of the field. That's what my wife, I got that her for Christmas, and she never has drove it much, so it's been sitting in the garage for 3 weeks, so I thought I'd better get out and drive it.
Yeah. Well, the battery dies, right?
Well, it's only got 4,000 miles on it.
Yeah, you're not driving a whole lot then.
Well, 2,000 of it. We go to Destin, Florida every year for vacation, the 4th of July week. We drove it down there and back, so 2,000 of it was there.
Well, see, now everybody that lives out in the Destin region, they know where to catch you when it comes time to for family vacations and stuff like that.
Yes.
So the other thing that I kind of want to talk about, just kind of wrap it up with some more bourbon talk, is over the years, you've had your hands in a lot of the releases that have come out and stuff like that. You've handed a lot over to Eddie as well, and then everybody's really banging on Bruce to really move here now. I've been sensing that a lot recently. Where do you kind of see the lineage going? I mean, are you excited to have Bruce come into here, and do you think he's going to do a good job? Like, what do you think that's going to be like?
Well, like Eddie said, if Eddie says if I don't do something happens to me, and something happens to me and Bruce, I'll haunt them the rest of their life.
Yeah.
But this is saying I enjoy so much about the bourbon business. All of us are close friends here in Kentucky. If one of them gets in trouble, the others do anything they can to help them out. And we're talking about Booker Knoll, Elmer Lee, and Parker Beam. We all grew up together. Fred Knoll and Eddie grew up together. Now, Parker's son, Craig Beam, they're about all the same age. They grew up together. But Craig had to give it up. Parker, close friend of mine, he had LS disease. Didn't get it till he was in his 70s. And he got to the point where he still could talk all right, but he couldn't do anything. They have big trucking companies and cattle farms. So Craig had to give it up and stay in taking care of the farms and all. Now you got Bruce and Fred's son, little Freddie, together now. So still that tradition is going on.
Yeah, I mean, you do see this family lineage that's happening across pretty much all of them, right? I mean,
yes.
there's something that that there is to be said about that. A little bit different on the Heaven Hill side, right? Like the Shapiros are more business focused rather than distilling focused. But
they're the only family-owned distillery left. All the rest of us are owned by foreign countries or stock.
So at one point, would you have rather had the opportunity to like buy back Wild Turkey and put it under the Russell name? Or?
No, we never did own it.
Yeah. Well, not buy it back. I'm just saying, like, if the opportunity presented itself, or it was just something that probably never would have happened anyway.
Never would have happened. No.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's it's very costly.
Yes.
Very costly. And see, most things, if you don't turn your inventory over in 3 or 4 months, you're not going to be in business very long. See, here, we're not thinking about even turning the inventory over to 7 to 8 to 10 to 12 years from now. So we got a lot of money tied up, especially in the state of Kentucky. We pay a tax on each barrel that sits here and ages.
Yes.
To the state of Kentucky.
Now, you had also mentioned 12 years, but from what I understand and what I remember is that you're more of a 7 to 8 year old bourbon kind of guy.
Yeah, it's a 7 to 12 is what I think.
7 to 12?
Yeah, now we do an older limited edition every once in a while. We put out a 14-year-old, a 15 to 17. The decades that we just finished, that Eddie put out, it's got 10 to 20-year-old bourbons, but it's just a few barrels. And we can, our regular bottling, the 101's 1,400 barrels to a batch bottling. In the small batch, it's no such term as small batch.
No, it doesn't really matter. You can call it whatever you want.
Ours is about 100 to 150 barrels. We're tasting it all the time. We find something we think's aging a little extra special. We'll set them aside and keep tasting them. And if it starts getting that woody, oaky taste, if you like a lot of wood and oaky taste, you like an older bourbon. But I don't like it. And if it starts getting that, we can move them down at the bottom of our house and slow that aging down. We can't move 700,000 barrels. That's what we got in inventory right now.
So I guess let's talk about that with woody and oaky bourbon, because there is kind of a shift in the way that consumers are looking at buying bourbon when it comes to like a whiskey geek market, right? When people are coming out with crazy age-dated 23, 27-year-old bourbons, and they've got this like heavy, oaky, tannicky kind of taste or flavor to it. However, people like you are saying that's probably not the way you should be drinking.
My personal taste.
Yeah.
I mean, it's your taste. You drink whatever you like, but that's not my taste.
So why is it that you think that I would say a new whiskey geek or a new whiskey consumer gets totally enthralled with this large number on the package rather than the taste in itself?
Well, a lot of people think the older it is, the better it is. Now, let's go back to Scotch, which I know a lot about that too. See, they're using barrels that's been used 2 or 3 times. I think it has to be 15, 16 years old to really get some good taste in it. Because they're using barrels that we've already used. And the one thing about it, when they start using your barrels, they want to keep using them because in 8 years we lose about 1/3 out of a barrel. It soaks into the wood. And they're getting some flavor out of that barrel. So if they used our barrels 1 year, Beams or Makers or Buffalo Trace, any of them, it's going to change the taste of their product. And that's one thing. It's like food and all. I want it to taste the same every time. I don't want something. If I eat food, taste this way tonight, next week it tastes a different way. I don't know whether I want it anymore or not.
Oh, there's a lot of variations you can do to mac and cheese.
Anymore.
I know, right?
And then, that's a funny thing. Mac and cheese now is all over the world. It used to be, you didn't see much of it, but anywhere you go in the world now, it's mac and cheese. And they got it all, there's so many different ways they fix it now and cook it.
Well, do you have a favorite mac and cheese recipe? We could just turn this into mac and cheese pursuit because I think there's not a lot of people that don't like mac and cheese out there.
Right.
Joe, right to make a good mac and cheese?
We don't eat much of it.
No mac and cheese for you all much anymore?
Now, my parents put tomatoes in it.
Really? That's a new one.
Yeah, their mac and cheese when I was growing up had tomatoes in it.
See, I don't think I've ever had that.
Well, I'm old.
I can always try it, though. I can always try it. So we're going to wrap it up with one last question here, and this actually came from a listener. His name is Jeremy, and he said, me and myself and several people that I know love visiting the distillery, and we love to visit with Jimmy for an hour or so. He's a good, rich source of information and bourbon lore. Now, he kind of wants to ask, what's a couple things to, like, an advice that you would give of things or codes to live by for younger generations?
Well, to me, do it, like I said a while ago, do it right or don't do it at all. Don't try to change. Keep consistent taste and flavoring all the time. Don't keep changing different things. I say Eddie them says I'm hard-headed in ways, but I've done a lot of experimenting over the years with American honey, with the barrels has been aged, different barrels and everything. I've done a lot of experimenting over the years, but I stay strictly to old tradition, doing it the right way.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's the bourbon side, but just in life in general. In life in general, what do you have some good little tidbits that you can hand down to young generations of, whether it's don't work too hard, maybe it's just enjoy what you love, whatever it is.
Enjoy what you love. Don't try to be somebody you're not.
Mm-hmm.
That's what, I hope you see I'm not a put on. Plain as I can be. That's something people try to put on a big spiel, and I'm not in favor of that.
Deep thoughts with plain old Jimmy right here. So let's go ahead and we'll wrap it up right there. So make sure that if you get the opportunity to come to Lawrenceburg and visit Wild Turkey, try to figure out, because we're recording around 3 o'clock right now, 4 o'clock. And he said he's usually down at the visitor center then, so that's when it's probably a good time to go catch him.
Or you can ask the visitor center, and I'll be glad to come down there and talk to you.
There you go. You can do that as well, right?
Yes.
So he'll do that for our podcast listeners.
Yes,
so,
I will.
Well, Jimmy, thank you so much for hopping on the show today. It was a pleasure to talk to you and capture a lot of that good information. I'm sure we all learn something new every single time, and I think we're going to have to go back and figure out who this Ezra Brooks character was.
Yeah. Well, thank you for coming and being with us. We enjoyed it. Anytime, you're always welcome here anytime you want to come.
Absolutely, except your house, right?
Except not at home. That's off limits. We're a family.
It's okay. I'll accept that.
But you'd be surprised. I'm not good on these computers. No, people tell me I saw you were home on the internet and all.
Mm-hmm. Well,
they know where you live.
Yeah, that's the scary thing about it. You got to hide your address.
No, I'm in the phone. My name's in the phone book here and everything.
Oh well, there you go. You can find them in the local Lawrence County phone book.
Right.
So with that, I want to say, Jimmy, thank you again for coming on the show today. It was a pleasure to have you. That's how you can find Jimmy and how you can meet him. I'm sure we already talked about it. He'll be back down in Destin, Florida at some point soon, and who knows, you might see him at your favorite liquor store across the country signing bottles too.
Thank you, sir. Appreciate you coming in with me. To say you're always welcome here anytime you want to come.
I appreciate it. And make sure you follow Bourbon Pursuit on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter. And if you do like what you hear, you want to see more interviews with legends like Jimmy, make sure you support us. Patreon.com, patreon.com/Bourbon Pursuit. That's how we're able to keep buying new equipment, putting miles on the car, and making these good interviews happen. So with that, I want to say thank you again, and we'll see everybody next week.
Thank you.
Cheers.